Hello, I'm Maryam Moshiri. This is Outside Source. Pope Francis makes a pilgrimage of penance to Canada to apologise for the suffering inflicted on Indigenous people in Catholic schools.
I am sorry.
Pido perdón
I ask
en
forgiveness
particular
in particular
por el modo
for
en
the
que
ways
muchos
in which
miembros de la
many members
Iglesia y de
of
las
the Church
comunidades
and of religious
religiosas
communities
cooperaron, también
cooperated,
por medio de
not
la
least through their indifference.
en
4 democracy activists are executed by Myanmar's military in what's said to be the first use of capital punishment in decades. The international community has condemned the killings.
With these horrific atrocities that the junta has carried out, there can be no business as usual with this regime.
And the 2 rivals competing to become the next British Prime Minister clash in the lead-up to their first head-to-head TV debate. Let's go to Canada now, where the Pope has made a formal apology for the harms done by Catholic-run residential schools across the country. He denounced the evil committed by so many Christians in the schools, speaking from the former site of one of the Ermine-Skin residential schools in central Alberta. It was one of the largest in Canada. Let's have a listen.
I am
Estoy
deeply
profundamente
sorry.
dolido. Pido perdón por la manera en la que
Sorry for the ways in which,
lamentablemente
regrettably,
muchos
many
cristianos adoptaron
Christians
la
supported
mentalidad
the colonizing mentality
colonialista de las
of the
potencias
powers
que
that
oprimieron a los
oppressed
pueblos
the indigenous
indígenas.
peoples.
Estoy dolido.
I am sorry.
Pido perdón
I ask
en
forgiveness
particular
in particular
por el modo
for
en
the
que
ways
muchos
in
miembros
which
de la
many members
Iglesia y de
of
las
the Church
comunidades
and of religious
religiosas
communities
cooperaron, también
cooperated,
por medio de
not
la
least through their
indiferencia,
indifference,
en esos
in
proyectos de
projects
destrucción
of cultural
cultural
destruction
y
and
asimilaron
forced
forzada de
assimilation
los gobiernos de
promoted
la
by the
época
governments of
que
that time,
finalizaron en
which
el sistema de
culminated
las
in the
escuelas
system of
residenciales.
residential schools.
Well, it was an emotional moment for the thousands of Indigenous people gathered at Musquatchie's to hear the long-awaited apology. Many in the crowd were survivors of abuse at residential schools. The visit has stirred mixed emotions across Canada, as Crystal Fraser from Canada's National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation explains.
Not all Indigenous people or survivors agree with this visit. Many do not believe that the Pope should be here, that this is not going to be sincere and genuine. But for a lot of people, including myself, this might be a next step that could facilitate some healing. But alongside this apology, we really need to see an action plan.
Well, let's look at what happened at the residential schools. From the 1880s and for much of the 20th century, it's believed more than 150,000 Indigenous children were taken from their families and put into dozens of mainly Catholic-run schools across the country, the last closing in 1996. Well, a report from Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission in 2015 details abuses suffered by the children. They were often referred to as savages and forbidden from speaking their own languages or practicing their own traditions. Many were physically and sexually abused. Well, thousands of children never made it home. The abuse led some to run away and others died of disease or by accident amid neglect. Here's Wilton Littlechild, Indigenous elder and residential school survivor.
This was the darkest, saddest, most unknown chapter in Canadian history. So it took us those 6 years to hear directly from the students their stories of the lived experience in those schools. Many of them wanted to hear an apology, but words are one thing. I actually coined a new word, I think, when I said it's about reconciliation.
Well, the abuse carried out in the residential schools has had devastating and lasting consequences, as survivor David Lugie explains.
What I could do is go to my 1969 photograph with my grade 1 class. There were 28 of us that were pictured in there, and I could count 10 of them that are living today, and maybe only a handful of them are working. The good majority of them didn't make it through the decades of the 80s or the 90s because of alcoholism, drugs, and suicide as a result of the traumatic events that happened at the Lejac Indian Residential School.
Well, I'm joined now by the National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, Chief Roseanne Archibald. Chief Roseanne, it's good to talk to you. Thank you for talking to us at the BBC. Let me ask you, first of all, for your reaction to the Pope's visit and apology.
It certainly got off to a little bit of a rough start in terms of co-planning with us. Some of the events were not, in our view, sufficiently planned out with our input. And today was an example where I was not actually allowed to speak to the survivors and take the stage. But today's event was about survivors. It was more about being there to support our survivors, to especially let them know that they're loved and cared for, as the Pope apologized to them. I also wanted to let you know that I do have Regional Chief Gerald Antoine behind me, who did go to Rome, if you had any specific questions from him.
Thank you very much for that. I mean, I want to know what difference it makes to have the Pope apologising to survivors in Canada, face to face, if you like, compared to doing it in Rome, so far away.
It was important to meet TRC call to action number 58, which was to have that apology happen here on Turtle Island. And so we met that TRC call today with the Pope coming to Musqueam, to a former site of an institution of assimilation and genocide, and that's how people interpret that apology, or how they do the wellness and healing moving forward, is really still unknown.
Not everyone was happy that the Pope was on Canadian soil at all, were they?
Yeah, it was really for the community of Ermineskin First Nation, the ability to host, a world leader like the Pope was something. They did an amazing job. And at the same time, it was important for survivors to see the Pope, to physically be in the same space with him, and to hear that apology. And we did hear a form of apologies, at least a couple of "I am very sorry's." However, he didn't apologize for the actions of the Roman Catholic Church itself. He talked about the evils of Christians who worked in that system. He talked about how the church, or how Christians had strayed from the teachings of Jesus, but he did not do that apology that many of us were hoping for, that acknowledgement that the church itself had done this irreparable harm, and just pushing it off to, a select few Christians, to me, was an easy way out. And I think he could have had a more fulsome kind of apology on behalf of the church, for sure.
The irreparable damage that has been done, give me a sense of that for viewers watching this.
Well, I always want to tell my own story, my personal story. My mother was a survivor. She is now passed on. She had to send 3 of her own children to the same institution she went to. And my oldest sister, died in an institution. And so when I think about my mother and her experience, this is one of the many, many stories. There's a scholar who said that 100% of First Nations people are impacted and suffer from intergenerational trauma, 100%. And that can be actually traced back to these institutions of assimilation and genocide. And so today, for me, it was so emotional in different ways, as it was for many survivors and many intergenerational trauma survivors. Looking at the Pope apologizing for the destruction of our families, the destruction of our culture and our languages, that was very meaningful. And I know that many survivors clapped and were weeping, and we're very, very grateful for that apology. Others are still not they don't feel like it's enough. Words are one thing, action is another thing. And he did allude to future actions of the church, like an investigation into the past. So there is definitely more work to do. And I think words are just the first step. The apology is just the first step. We've always said that.
OK, well, Chief Roseanne Archibald, it's been really interesting to talk to you. I do thank you for taking the time to talk to us at the BBC.
All right. Thank you very much. Take care.
Let's go to Myanmar now, where 4 pro-democracy activists have been executed by Myanmar's military. It's the first use of capital punishment in decades. In the past hour, we've seen protests against the executions. This footage you're watching here shows a dozen masked protesters in the city of Yangon. They're holding a banner that says, "We will never be frightened." Well, state media said the 4 were executed for committing brutal and inhumane terror acts. Among them was well-known long-term activist Ko Jimmy and former lawmaker Pio Zayadao. Well, the families are asking for information on the executions, and it appears there was no warning. Pio Zayadao's mother spoke to the BBC.
When we met on Zoom last Friday, my son was healthy and smiling. He asked me to send his reading glasses, dictionary and some money to use in the prison. So I collected those things and brought them to the prison today. And that's why I didn't think they would kill him.
Well, here's more from the editor of the BBC's Burmese service on who these pro-democracy activists were.
That very well-known pro-democracy activist, the Jimmy, is one of the top leaders of 88 generation students movement. So he took part in 88, movement against the military coup at that time too. He's been in prison. He's been sentenced to several years. So he spent nearly 20 years in prison already. So he, when this military coup happened last year or so, then with his pedigree that he joined this movement, he was detained. Another one, Ziyad, is also a very famous hip-hop artist. He joined NLD, he became the lawmaker twice, 2012 and 2015, and he was very close to Aung San Suu Kyi. He accompanied Aung San Suu Kyi in almost her overseas trip during his MPship.
Well, let's remind ourselves about her. Aung San Suu Kyi is Myanmar's former civilian leader. Her National League for Democracy party, the NLD, won landslide victories in 2 democratic elections, which came after decades of military rule. The military, or junta as it's known, overthrew her government in a coup in February last year, then arrested and imprisoned her. That's led to widespread demonstrations and a military crackdown on pro-democracy protesters, activists and journalists. Here's a view from the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Myanmar on why these executions have happened.
This is a junta that is, I think, desperate. They continue to lose control of the country. They have no moral authority, certainly in the country. They are despised by most in the country. So I think this is another desperate attempt of the junta to try to instill fear and with continue their grip on whatever power that remains for them. But it's going to have absolutely the opposite effect.
Well, the international community has reacted to the executions. The UN's Human Rights Commissioner called them cruel violations of the rights to life and to a fair trial. And Antony Blinken, America's Secretary of State, said the US strongly condemned the executions, adding such reprehensible acts of violence and repression cannot be tolerated. In the last hour, the US State Department gave this update.
We underscore that with the escalating violence, with these horrific atrocities that the junta has carried out, there can be no business as usual with this regime. We urge all countries to ban the sale of military equipment to Burma, to refrain from lending the regime any degree of international credibility, and we call on ASEAN to maintain its important precedent, only allowing Burmese non-political representation at regional events.
But despite that condemnation, there are concerns about what might come next. Let's hear from Tom Andrews again. He was asked if he feared there could be more executions after these.
I fear that they will. There are more than 140 people on death row. We have seen the depths of depravity of this regime seem to know no limits whatsoever.
Well, let's hear more about what life under the military regime is like there from this opposition activist.
It's a war on terror, basically, war on terror. And they're using nationwide scout art policy. They are banning down everything, including people, including children, including old people, disabled people. And also during interrogation center, they have killed a dozen. So now they have killed more than 2,000 civilians within 560 days. And they also banned down more than 10,000 houses. 6 million people are in need of emergency support, and 1 million are renting out of their houses. So they have already clearly shown the world who they are.
Well, it's as we heard there, it's estimated more than 2,000 people have been killed by military forces since the coup, and nearly 15,000 have been arrested. Well, in reaction to that, we've seen the creation of a shadow Myanmar government, the National Unity Government, made up of activists, ethnic groups and former lawmakers. One advisor to that group told the BBC how the world should respond to those killings.
The international community have enough evidence and enough in order to do what needs to be done to control these things and to ensure that the impunity, the cycle of impunity of such crimes is ending, and the international community must cut all ties with the junta.
Stay with us on Outside Source, because still to come, in the birthplace of the Arab Spring, Tunisians are voting on whether to reverse many of the democratic reforms introduced 8 years ago.
The US space agency NASA has ordered an investigation after confirmation today that astronauts were cleared to fly while drunk.
The last foot patrol in South Armagh, once an everyday part of the soldiers' lot, drudgery and danger, now no more after almost 4 decades.
If one is on one's own in a private house, not doing any harm to anyone, I don't really see why all these people should wander in and say you're doing something wrong.
6 rare white lion cubs are on the prowl at Worcestershire Park, and already they've been met with a roar of approval from visitors.
They're lovely, yeah, really sweet. Yeah, they were cute.
This is Outside Source live from the BBC newsroom. Our lead story: Pope Francis makes a pilgrimage of penance to Canada and apologises for the suffering inflicted on Indigenous people in Catholic schools. A little over 10 years ago, Tunisia emerged as the birthplace of a huge political shift known as the Arab Spring. Well, today, people have been voting on a controversial referendum on a new constitution. It's prompted fears the country could move away from democracy, concentrating powers in the hands of one man, the president.
We will build together with our arms, ideas and determination. We will build, God willing, a new republic. We will build a new republic based on real freedom and real justice and national dignity, because there is no dignity for nations except with the dignity of its citizens.
Well, it's the latest in a series of big political power plays directed by President Kais Saied. In 2021, the president froze parliament, sacked the government and assumed rule. In June this year, he removed 57 judges from their posts, claiming it would stop corruption. And today, 1 year to the day since he ousted Parliament, the future of the Constitution is put to a vote. The changes would subordinate Parliament under the President and remove most checks on his authority. Those in favour say it'll be the end to corruption and political factionalism. Here's what the President told the media earlier.
Our money and our wealth are enormous, and our will is even greater, to rebuild a new Tunisia and a new republic, one that breaks with the past.
But it's a break with the past that's got critics of the president worried. They warned the proposed constitutional changes would reverse the democracy that many Tunisians fiercely fought for more than a decade ago.
The Constitution itself, according to many legal experts, has flaws and also authoritarian tendencies. So this is a constitution that could build an authoritarian regime that would perhaps resemble the regimes that Tunisia had before 2011.
Well, to understand what is at stake, let's go back to just before 2011, the start of what would become known as the Arab Spring. In December 2010, the fruit seller Mohamed Bouzazizi self-immolated after a local official confiscated his barrow. He later died. Well, his death sparked protests in his town, which would eventually spread across the country, and thousands took to the street demanding an end to the government of the time, and the calls for change were loud. Well, after 23 years in power, the then President Zine El Abidine Ben Ali was forced out. Later that year, the first free elections were held. Now, what you see here is 2014, celebrations in the Tunisian parliament as a new constitution is agreed upon, bringing democracy to Tunisia. Well, this revolution was groundbreaking, not just in what it meant for Tunisians, but what it inspired across the region. These incredible images are from Tahrir Square in Egypt in late January 2011. Hundreds of thousands of protesters took to the streets in often violent clashes with authorities. It would result in the end of Hosni Mubarak's 29-year rule. Well, the push for revolution spread far, from Tunisia to Egypt and Libya, across to Yemen, Bahrain and up to Syria. Well, hopes were high for the future. The former UN chief, Ban Ki-moon, said it transformed the geopolitical landscape. As the only country to transition to democracy, Tunisia has often been held up as a success story from that Arab Spring. But as former US ambassador to Tunisia, Gordon Gray, points out, a number of challenges remain.
There was a tremendous amount of political progress, but there was, unfortunately, that was not matched by progress on the economic front. And that's left too many people wondering if it was all worth it and wondering what will happen next.
Well, our Middle East correspondent Anna Foster's been following it all from Tunis, and she describes the mood on the ground.
I think it depends which section of the population you're talking to. So there's a huge swathe of them who do support President Kais Saied. And these are the people who are struggling financially at the moment. They see him as a strong leader. They see this new constitution as a really beneficial thing that will turn around the struggling economy in this country. But if you talk to the people who you saw in those images there, the people who protested a decade ago for democracy, their frustration now is that they see their freedoms going backwards. They see what Kais Saied has done. They see the way that he has swept away things like that hard fought for constitution from 2014 that took 2 years of writing and consultation in favour of this new one that's being voted on today, which took 4 weeks to write and was put together by a panel appointed by him. So there's a lot of frustration in this country. Depending on who you are, your frustration comes from a different source, but it will be really fascinating to see how this country changes in the next few hours, because this new constitution will almost certainly be voted through, and this country will go back in many ways to where it was a decade ago.
Well, in the next hour, the two rivals to become the UK's next Prime Minister will hold their first head-to-head debate. We know the candidates are now at the venue. This is Rishi Sunak arriving. And this is Liz Truss also arriving in just the last few minutes. Well, the winner of the race will become the next Prime Minister and also the new leader of the Conservative Party. They'll be chosen by around 160,000 Conservative Party members. That's around 0.3% of the UK electorate. Well, let's cross live now to our UK political correspondent, Rob Watson, who is in Westminster. And Rob, up till now, the debates that we've seen between the potential winners have often been described as quite damaging to the Tory party because people have been attacking each other. Do we expect more of the same this evening?
Well, it's certainly been true so far. There's been a lot of what might be called blue-on-blue violence. And actually, Maryam, if tonight went anything like what's been going on behind the scenes between the two campaigns and on social media, you'd just be amazed that they wouldn't actually come to blows. But it has been nasty, it has been divisive, it's been the kind of things that the opposition parties must be rubbing their hands over, and both Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak have been urged to kind of remember one of you is going to win and one of you is going to have to fight the next election and one of you is going to have to try and keep the Conservative Party together.
What are we expecting in terms of the vote? I know the Tory party membership are going to be voting, and I know, having looked at the latest polls, that Liz Truss is currently in the lead?
Yes, I mean, she's the one with everything to lose, and it's Rishi Sunak who really, maybe in some ways, has to really make a gamble, has to really go for it, presumably have to try and undermine her sort of the sense that she is ready for high office, and of course to try and ram home this point that he likes to make, that the central tenet of Liz Truss's what you might call rather Reaganite approach to economics, which is tax cuts first, worry about everything else afterwards, just won't work. So one imagines that he'll have to sort of try a sort of a joint personal attack and policy attack. And I guess Liz Truss being out in front, you just have to make sure that you don't make any mistakes.
And what's the process after that, Rob? Explain briefly for our viewers what happens next and when do we have a new leader?
OK, I'll be quick. On speed up button. So there's just lots of hustle. There's another TV debate, and then the two candidates will go around and talk to the 160,000 or so Conservative activists at hustings up and down the country. And then we get a result on the 5th and a new Prime Minister on the 6th of September. OK,
Rob Watson, as always, concise and precise. Love it. Thanks, Rob. Now, all of the latest on that leadership debate will be on our website. You can also watch it live here on the BBC in, I think, about half an hour's time. That's it from me and the team on Outside Source. Thank you so much for your company. Do stay with us on the BBC. Bye-bye.
Hello. This time last week, Western Europe was enduring an historic heatwave with record temperatures set in the UK. But this week, things are feeling quite different because we've got cooler air pushing in from the northwest behind this weather system, this band of cloud. And as that continues to work eastwards during Tuesday, it will generate some showers and thunderstorms stretching from the Baltic states through Poland down into the Balkans, parts of northern Italy. To the southeast of that, well, we've still got some heat. That is where the heat is being pushed at the moment. So Turkey, Cyprus, Greece, much of the Balkans still quite hot through Tuesday afternoon. Whereas for Iberia, it is certainly cooler than it was, say, a week ago. And across France and the UK, some places here have temperatures 15 to 18 degrees down on where they were a week ago. Pretty unsettled across Scandinavia, low pressure bringing some heavy downpours and some strong and gusty winds. Some scattered showers and storms continue to work across Eastern Europe.